Over $100 billion were lost to fraud within the program providing COVID-19 unemployment insurance aid.
That's according to a report by the House Oversight Committee. The report says organized criminals were involved and states didn't do much to stop them. And joining me now to discuss this is Pete Sepp, the president of the National Taxpayers Union. Good morning to you, Pete. Thanks for coming on. So right when the pandemic was at its peak, you had countless Americans stuck at home, couldn't go to work, and the government had two goals: get as much financial aid out to the people who need it, and two, do it fast. Was it that speed that led to this problem being possible, or was it just that organized criminals came in and took advantage of the situation, or something else?
It wasn't just the amount of money and the speed at which it was delivered, it was the flaws in the systems administering the benefits as well. We have to remember that the states, which are primarily responsible for handling unemployment claims and dispersing the funds, were unprepared for anything like the pandemic. Their systems were antiquated. They had poor record keeping. They had very poor processes for oversight to begin with. And once you piled trillions of dollars in aid in various forms onto these systems and demanded that we push the money out of the Treasury door as quickly as possible, well, that was a combination for a great deal of waste, fraud, and abuse. The unemployment program was just one of them.
So, Pete, this is about 10 to 15% of the total funds that were lost, and that's according to the Government Accountability's Office. That puts the estimate at about 100 to 135 billion. Is that what you're estimating?
Yes, but that is only one component. That is outright fraud. In other words, individuals, criminal gangs, inmates, what have you, actually creating fake identities to get unemployment benefits or stealing live checks that come through the mail. There were other problems. Benefits were going to people who were deceased, or individuals making claims were actually overstating how long they had worked and how much money they were making, and the government wasn't checking. And this doesn't even count other aid programs like Paycheck Protection Program loans or the Employee Retention Tax Credit. The absolute highest total I have seen is above $400 billion of wasted funds when you take account of all of those things I just mentioned.
Right, and Pete, the committee reports that these recipients didn't even need to show evidence that they were looking for work in order to get this aid. This is something that is now in the spotlight. You put the number at $400 billion. That's a lot of money. Who bears the responsibility for this?
Well, certainly government officials up and down the ladder, from the local level, the states, all the way up to Washington, D.C., they knew that this much money shoveled out the door this fast with systems that had very poor oversight was a prescription for disaster. They said, well, we're going to have to sort out all of the wasted money later. It's later, and the total is staggering. They need to prepare now for the next big wave of unemployment. I mean, that's inevitable. No matter what our economy does a year from now, 10 years from now, there will be large numbers of people unemployed at some point. Do we have systems in place, good computer records, good oversight, fraud checks, all kinds of policies in place so that when it happens the next time, we won't see this much waste, fraud, and abuse? We have published a toolkit for policymakers of best practices that states have implemented from Iowa to Mississippi, everywhere else, that are going to help control the waste, fraud, and abuse and give taxpayers the kind of oversight they deserve going forward.
Right, nobody wants another pandemic, but it is good to be prepared in the case of something that comes up down the line. The committee says, though, that the money can't be recovered. Why not?
Well, part of the reason, as far as fraud goes, is that many of the people who committed the fraud and established these fake identities have long since erased their electronic trail from the internet. There's no way to actually track down these folks and claw the money back. Now, there are certain procedures in some of the pandemic relief laws that allow the government to continue investigating and trying to recover the funds. Those are going to expire next year. They ought to be extended indefinitely so we can at least try to get some of this money back. So far, only about 7% of the fraudulent funds have been recovered. I'm not optimistic that you'll get much more than 15% recovery rate, and that's going to take a lot of work.
I understand what you're saying, Pete, and the committee found that this program was more susceptible to fraud because in the first 9 months that you're receiving this money, you don't have to show any evidence of earnings. What's your comment on that?
Incredible. I mean, even in the middle of a pandemic, it shouldn't be that difficult for government officials to say to those applying for these benefits, we know you're hurting. We know you need this money. Can you furnish at least some minimal records of your work history so that we can properly calibrate the benefits that you need to receive? That step would have prevented a whole lot of problems. Better computer systems that were more resistant to fraud and tampering would have helped as well. But that very first step was the one that needed to be taken.
Well, thank you so much for helping us understand this. Pete Sepp, the president of the National Taxpayers Union. Thank you.
My pleasure.